Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, you're watching GB News, and coming up today on The Political Correction, we look at the ongoing situation in Ukraine as a month approaches since Vladimir Putin commenced his invasion. We talk about the P&O ferry scandal, and Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe returns home after years of detention in Iran. That plus plenty more after the latest news.
Good morning, it's just gone 10 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Russian forces have bombed an art school where about 400 people were taking shelter in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol. There's no word yet on casualties, but the city council confirmed that the building was destroyed, adding there were victims under the rubble. President Zelensky described the horror of the attack in an address to the nation.
The blockade of Mariupol will go down in history of responsibility for war crimes. To do what the occupiers did to a peaceful city is a terror that will be remembered for centuries to come. And the more Ukrainians tell the world about it, the more support we find. The more Russia uses terror against Ukraine, the worse the consequences will be for it.
Ukrainian President Zelensky there. Now, the Prime Minister is urging China to join the global community in its disapproval of the war in Ukraine. Boris Johnson believes some of President Xi Jinping's team is having second thoughts about Beijing's neutral position on the invasion. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is also facing fierce criticism after comparing the struggle of Ukrainians fighting Russian forces to Britain's voting for Brexit. Here's what he said at the Tory Spring Party conference yesterday.
When the British people voted for Brexit, in such large numbers, I don't believe it was because they were remotely hostile to foreigners. It's because they wanted to be free, to do things differently, and for this country to be able to run itself.
Detectives have launched a manhunt following the murder of a 19-year-old woman in central London. Police say early indications suggest 22-year-old Meher Marouf had been in a relationship with the victim and that they had been together that evening. She was found with serious neck injuries at a student accommodation in Clerkenwell and died at the scene. The Met Police says anyone who sees Marouf should not approach him but call 999 immediately. Millions of people in England will begin to be offered COVID booster jabs this week. The NHS says the vaccine will be able to be available for care home residents, those over 75 years of age, and the immunosuppressed aged 12 and over. A total of 5 million people are expected to be given the jab. It's been reported that government ministers knew P&O ferries planned to slash 800 jobs before staff members were told. The Sunday Times says ministers were told by officials it would ensure the firm remained a key player in the UK market for years to come. The newspaper says it received a leaked memo from a senior Whitehall official saying without these decisions, an estimated 2,200 staff would lose their jobs. A funeral has been held for the Australian cricket legend Shane Warne. Family and friends, including retired Australian Test captain Mark Taylor and the former England skipper Michael Vaughan, attended a private service in Melbourne. The 52-year-old died just over 2 weeks ago while on holiday in Thailand. A post-mortem found he died of natural causes. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge will learn about efforts to preserve Belize's barrier reef as they continue on their Caribbean tour. William and Kate spent time with the country's Prime Minister at the beginning of their 8-day trip to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. The trip has sparked controversy, though, among local residents, including objections to the couple's helicopter landing site. A toy company in Chicago has raised over £110,000 for Ukraine by selling President Zelensky Lego figurines. The unofficial Zlego toys went on sale with a price tag of £75 and sold out within hours. All funds from Citizen Bricks sales will go towards medical aid for Ukraine. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to the political correction.
Good morning. You're watching GB News and this is the political correction. I'm Jenna Davison and today I'm joined by Paul Embry in Norfolk and from Northern Ireland, Arlene Foster. We're here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. As you know, this is not about journalists talking to journalists, it's about you telling us what you think. Coming up in the first hour, we take a look at the ongoing situation in Ukraine as we approach a month since Vladimir Putin launched his invasion. We discuss the P&O ferry saga after the company slashed 800 jobs without warning this week. And Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe returns home to her family after years of detention in Iran. As always, we want to hear from you today. So to get involved, email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. This is the political correction. This week, Joe Biden declared to reporters that his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, was a war criminal. The US president elaborated during a press conference, saying Mr. Putin was a murderous dictator, a pure thug who is waging an immoral war against the people of Ukraine. The comments came before a 2-hour conversation between Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping, which, according to Chinese state media, was candid and in-depth. Elsewhere, French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz both had conversations with Putin, in which they reportedly urged the Russian leader to introduce a ceasefire and improve the humanitarian situation. So, Paul, I want to come to you first. There seems to be this sort of increased rhetoric here from the US president. But does it look as though there are signs that there could be a diplomatic solution to the invasion?
Well, you would hope so, because at the end of the day, Deanna, diplomacy or annexation, as far as I can see, are the only two ways out of this conflict. And clearly, we don't want annexation of Ukraine, so we have to work towards diplomacy. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't condemn Putin for the invasion in the first place. And on the question of whether or not he's a war criminal, I think plainly he is. If you launch an illegal war of aggression against another country, then in my book that makes you guilty of a war crime. I just have to say also, however, I just think there's a bit of hypocrisy about this whole debate about war criminality. I mean, I've heard in recent days and weeks, for example, Gordon Brown and Tony Blair talk about Putin being held responsible for an act which constitutes a war crime. And the truth is, you know, the West itself doesn't have clean hands on this. We did a very similar thing in 2003 when we launched an illegal invasion of Iraq. That was an unprovoked attack. It turns out that the premise on which the attack was based turned out to be false. And, you know, these same politicians in Britain didn't say, very few of them at least, said after that, well, our leaders are guilty of a war crime and they should be put before the International Criminal Court. So I like consistency on questions like this. I don't like the idea that some people can be condemned for war crimes when other people tend to get away with it. But to go back to the original point, yeah. There needs to be diplomacy. We need to look at a settlement, I think, based on the Minsk Accords, which, as I've argued before, on the one hand respects the sovereignty of Ukraine, but also deals with the very real problems of the Russian-speaking population in the Donbass.
Mm-hmm. So, Arlene, over to you. We've seen now calls kind of from both sides, from the Russians and the Ukrainians, for peace talks to be successful, though clearly with a lot of different opinions on specifically what the agreement should be. Are you confident that there will be some kind of peace agreement?
Well, I think the focus is now turned, hasn't it, both in America and indeed here in the UK, with what our Prime Minister has said this morning to China. And I find that very interesting that we're now focusing on China. Obviously, China abstained in the United Nations in relation to the invasion into Ukraine. And I think there's a concern now that there may be movement there. That is a big worry, and we need to pay attention to that, and I'm sure that our Foreign Office officials are doing that. But it's the plea from our Prime Minister today to say that China shouldn't choose the side of evil. And I think that terminology, evil, is something that we should focus on as well, because at the beginning of all of this, you will remember that people thought Putin would be mad to go into Ukraine, and there's no way he would go into the whole of Ukraine. He may go into the Donbass region on the east of the country, but he wouldn't invade the whole of Ukraine because that simply would be mad. Now we're talking about evilness. So it's all of this moral code that we're now introducing into the discourse around Ukraine, which I find very interesting. But whatever about that, we seen Putin last week. He gave an interview on Wednesday, which he did a lot of ranting and raving in and talking about purifying the Russian forces and hunting out traitors. Then we had the huge rally in Moscow on Friday, dressed up as if he was going to the ski slopes. But in any event, huge rally, an enormous amount of people there, where again he was giving this imperialistic rant around Russia and what he wanted to see for Russia. And I think it's going to be very difficult. Paul's already referred to war crime. How can you, on one hand, engage in diplomacy, and then on the other hand say, well, once this is over, you're going to the Hague because you're guilty of war crimes. So diplomacy is a very difficult thing to be involved in, and I know we're going to talk about it throughout the programme. But it is about walking soft or speaking softly, but carrying a big stick. And I think for us here in the West, Putin believed that we were weak. He looked at what had happened in Afghanistan and he decided to move. So that is a lesson for us, not to drop our defence again and to make sure that we are strong in terms of our military and that we do have the ability to react when we need to react.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have seen sort of escalation of these attacks. I mean, reports today of from Mariupol with places where refugees have been sort of hiding now being bombed, you know, civilians being bombed. So any claims that it's just military targets, clearly completely untrue there from the Russians. But at what point should we step in if the violence continues, particularly if it gets ever closer to, you know, the Polish border or the Moldovan border, or dare I say it crosses over? At what point should kind of we in the West, we in Britain, at what point should we intervene, Paul?
Well, I think if it came to it and a NATO country were in some way attacked, then I would expect NATO to invoke Article 5, I think it is, which means that all NATO member states come to that country's defence. I mean, I have to say, I think that's probably very unlikely that we're going to find ourselves in that territory. I mean, Putin surely understands that to do that would result in a very, very serious backlash militarily and politically and economically and in all sorts of ways. Beyond that, Deanna, I don't necessarily think we can intervene in any military fashion, short of doing what I think we're doing at the moment, which is trying to arm the Ukrainian resistance and to give them weapons. I mean, the reality is, and this is where realpolitik, as it's called, comes into it. Russia is a nuclear power, and I think the last thing we ought to be doing is getting involved in military action against somebody who's got nuclear weapons, and particularly when, as many people have pointed out at the moment, you know, what is Putin's state of mind? In my view, I don't think he is acting rationally. There's possibly no limit to what he might do in those circumstances. So you know, we need to. I think we probably do need to tone down the rhetoric and the bellicosity, and we need a diplomatic way out of it, which, as I say, safeguards Ukraine's sovereign territory, but also delivers on some of the real security concerns that Russian people have in that region.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's focus on this point around the Russian people, because, you know, Putin's attending these rallies, and yet we are seeing increasing protests taking place in Russia, be that on news channels or actual protests out on the street. And I think one thing that I find really fascinating is the actual impact of sanctions on everyday Russian citizens who perhaps don't support the war, or perhaps, don't take that much of an interest in current affairs to really know either way. Arlene, have we seen much about how these sanctions play out for your sort of everyday Russian citizen?
Well, I think that's always the key. And I mean, Paul and I and you have talked about this in the past, that it's actually ordinary families and ordinary people in Russia who will be hit by the sanctions. I'm not sure that if you had an 18-year-old son being sent off to war in Ukraine, you would have been very supportive of the war in any event. But certainly when you're having difficulty going to the shops and having your basic food supply there, that's certainly going to make you think about what your leader is involved in. And it's interesting, I think, Diana, that our own government has involved itself in trying to counter some of the disinformation in Russia with a government information cell set up to counter the sort of disinformation that Russia is putting out there. They're trying to counter that, to tackle it, put out the truth of what's going on in Russia. They're paying for advertisements right across Russia, not just relying on social media. So I think it's interesting that our own government is saying that they want to influence ordinary Russians in a way to say to them, this is what your leader is doing, it is wrong, and therefore you should react in the appropriate way.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about disinformation, but in a sort of UK context, because what we've seen happen this week is the media regulator Ofcom revoking Russia Today's licence to broadcast in the UK with immediate effect. Russia Today, which is a state-backed news channel, has been under investigation by Ofcom for their coverage of Vladimir Putin's ongoing invasion of Ukraine. The channel became unavailable on all UK broadcast platforms earlier this month as a result of a ban imposed by the European Union. Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries described the channel as Putin's polluting propaganda machine. So, Arlene, clearly this is a decision taken by Ofcom, which is an independent body, independent of kind of government. But do you think it's the right decision from Ofcom to ban RT, or do you think that goes too far with regards to free speech?
Well, I think it's about proportionality, and I actually think that it's not proportionate, because very few people believe that Russia Today was a basis of getting impartial information around Ukraine. So I think most people regarded it as Putin's propaganda machine, and they could see how ridiculous some of his claims were when they listened to it. So I don't think it's proportionate action, because, of course, we should always try and defend free speech. And because of that, it's one of the fundamentals of democracy. We need to look at whether it's proportionate to suspend or to stop someone from broadcasting. And therefore, whilst I'm no lover of Russia Today, I can assure you of that, I do think that it is disproportionate at this time.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, what's your take?
I tend to agree. I would say, why only now is it that Ofcom have suddenly decided to close down RT when it's been going for years? It strikes me as opportunism. It strikes me that Ofcom is caving into people who are demanding that RT be shut down. And look, I mean, I tend to take a similar view to Arlene. I mean, I'd like to think I'm grown up enough to pick through what I consider to be propaganda on RT and what I consider to be more balanced reporting. And I'd like to think that most people in this country would consider themselves grown up enough to do that as well. And I think they probably are. And I'm just uncomfortable about living in a society that just simply shuts down television news channels, because palpably in this case, because it wasn't giving out the right message as the authorities saw it. And I have to say, I mean, I don't think you need to be pro-Putin to take that view. I've seen all sorts of commentators express unease about it. John Simpson, for example, that doyen of foreign reporting for the BBC over the years, himself has expressed real concern about it. So in my book, it allows people to say, well, you're no different to Putin. You're just shutting down alternative media outlets. You're just shutting down views that you don't like. I would have liked to see RT continue and people, where necessary, to continue challenging it. That's what I think a democratic grown-up society should do.
I suppose the sort of broader question is, where do we draw that fine line between kind of propaganda and pure disinformation? And I guess this is what Ofcom were looking at with regards to the RT reporting. Arlene, do you think that we should just allow kind of any kind of broadcasts along this vein, or do you think it is right that Ofcom step in when something is, complete disinformation and completely false?
Well, I mean, that's the reason Ofcom's there. Ofcom's there to be a regulator. Ofcom is there to call out broadcasters when they're putting out things which palpably aren't true, and they could have continued to do that. And if RT had said, no, we're going to continue to put out the disinformation and lies, then Ofcom could have taken proportionate action. But I think if you ban something like RT, then people start to question whether actually they were telling the truth, and is that the reason why they're being put underground? That conspiracy theories then begin to roll out. And I don't think there was a need for that, because anybody watching RT would have known where they were coming from, and the disinformation and lies that they were putting out was quite clear for everybody to see. So I just worry that some people will now say, well, clearly government felt threat by that, they have got rid of it, and therefore the conspiracy theories will now start to run.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, is there a danger now that it actually drives the sort of RT-style messaging kind of underground, more online in places that are harder to regulate?
Well, I mean, I agree with Arlene on the conspiracy point. I think when you try to ban people who are peddling things that you consider to be untrue, that you consider to be damaging, it allows those people to say, hey, look what they've done to me. Why do you think they've done that? Because I was telling the truth and they didn't like it. Which is exactly what conspiracy theorists themselves do. So it certainly does allow now people to say, well, hold on a second, was RT onto something? Were they giving us information that other mainstream news channels in Britain weren't giving us? So it plays into all of that kind of mindset, and that itself, I think, is reason enough not to ban a TV station. But look, if television stations put out stuff that's palpably untrue, I think we've got the type of society, the type of open society here that can challenge that and can say, look, this was clearly untrue and these are the reasons why. And if that happens, let us do that. I think the sledgehammer approach of saying, let's just clamp down on them by shutting them down and cutting off their oxygen supply and stopping them from speaking entirely, has always got the tendency to backfire. And I suspect, by the way, that people at RT and people in Moscow will be rubbing their hands together and saying this has played into our hands, actually.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose we have seen, haven't we, over a number of years, lots of people boycotting RT anyway, refusing to appear even when they're invited, sort of delegitimising the channel and their message, yet without taking that, as you say, sort of sledgehammer to crack a nut approach. Anyway, send us your views from home. What do you think? Were Ofcom right? Should RT have been banned, or should it have been allowed to continue broadcasting? Now, coming up on the Political Correction, we discuss the Homes for Ukraine scheme introduced by the government, and the P&O ferry scandal, which saw hundreds of workers lose their jobs on the spot this week. All of that coming up after the break, so don't go anywhere.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. UK government has officially launched its Homes for Ukraine scheme, which will see families across the country host Ukrainians who fled their homeland following Russia's invasion. Secretary of State for Levelling Up Michael Gove said of the scheme that the United Kingdom has a long and proud history of helping others in their hour of need, adding that the scheme offers a lifeline to those who've been forced to flee. Politicians who've expressed an interest in hosting refugees include Transport Secretary Grant Shapps and Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer. So, Paul, I'm going to throw to you first on this one. Clearly, this is an act of international altruism, but do you think there is an element of political grandstanding from MPs here and kind of pressure on them to host displaced families?
I think there is. It seems to me, I mean, first of all, look, if someone volunteers to take in a refugee fleeing war, good on them. You know, they've got my support. I pay tribute to them. But politically, I do think there is a little bit of virtue signalling going on. It's almost become a little bit like the new, look at me, I'm taking a picture of myself wearing a mask on an empty train, aren't I a good person type of thing. And I think we need to avoid that, actually. I don't think we need to make it the subject of political point scoring in that way. I think a bigger point that I would make, actually, is the whole question of international refugees and why suddenly there has been a very different approach to the Ukraine situation to the approach we take in other wars which are raging around the world at the moment. Now, you know, as I say, I pay tribute to anyone who takes in a Ukrainian refugee, and of course, we've got a history in this country of providing shelter to people who are fleeing war, and that's a proud history, and it's one that we should look to continue with. But I'm uncomfortable, to be honest, Deanna, about what I'm seeing as a little bit of a hierarchy of victimhood. There have been thousands and thousands of Kurdish refugees displaced over recent years. Nobody in Britain seems to be paying much attention to them or offering to take them into their homes. At the moment, there's a war raging in the Yemen, led by Saudi Arabia, our ally, ironically. And again, thousands of Yemeni people have been displaced, men, women and children. And there doesn't seem to be any scheme to give support or succour to those refugees. So I understand that this war is taking place in Europe. But at the end of the day, it doesn't mean that people are suffering any more than they are in those other wars. And I would like to see a little bit of consistency on this. I think, you know, we need to look at the big picture and understand that there are refugees all across the world, and perhaps they all deserve our support.
Yeah, and this is something that we've discussed a few times on the show now, Paul, isn't it, since the sort of crisis in Ukraine kicked off. Arlene, I want to come back to this point around kind of politicians and hosting refugees, because you'll know from your time as First Minister, you do get asked these questions. You will always get asked, you know, in this circumstance, will you personally host a family? I've been asked it by a whole host of different media outlets, as though it's just a sort of snap decision. But actually, I think there are things that aren't taken into account, aren't there? Such as, one, security, two, actually being able to provide that dedicated support, especially, you know, sort of when you're a Westminster politician, when you're up and down from your constituency and away for at least half the week. But also, something that doesn't really get mentioned, that media support as well. Because if a high-profile politician takes in a family, then is that family not at risk of media scrutiny or, you know, potentially even being hounded by media when what they're just trying to do is resettle?
Yeah, and I can understand why politicians would want to look as if they are doing their bit for refugees coming in from Ukraine. I absolutely understand that. And for those who have stepped forward, I'm sure they have thought about it a lot. I know that Grant Shapps said that he had discussed it very much with his family, and you would like to think that they recognise the challenges, not just for their own family and bringing a family from Ukraine into that family, but also the fact, as you've rightly said, that Ukrainian family have been forced to leave their home. They've been displaced. They will be distressed. They will need support, not just in terms of food and access to services, but also emotional support as well as to how they deal with what has been going on. And if you are a member of parliament and you live on your own, you certainly will not have the time to provide that support that those people will need. And you're right to draw attention to the security element and also the media element, because you know very well, Diana, if you were to take someone into your home in Bishop Auckland, first thing that would happen is that the local newspaper would land. They would want photographs with you and your Ukrainian family. And then that pushes that family into the spotlight, whether they want to be in the spotlight or not, despite the fact that these are people in distress, people who have been forced from their home. And actually, what they probably want is anonymity and a bit of peace and quiet. So it looks as if politicians are doing the right thing, but really, you really have to think about, are you doing good for the people that you're hoping to bring into your home by bringing them into a high-profile person's home? And I think people should really think about that.
Yeah, I think it's some of these nuances that often kind of don't get discussed, you know, when the blanket question is asked. And we've seen a number of politicians who've, you know, come out and said that they would be happy to host a family and have registered for the scheme. I think there are 8 or 9 now who've kind of publicly declared. But I think it's really important, as you said, Arlene, to take into account personal circumstances. You know, so for example, were I to take in a family in my Bishop Auckland home, it'd be really difficult because I'm away 4 or 5 days a week. The place in which I live, it's difficult to access with buses, which means they'd need a car to get around. They might not necessarily drive. And also just knowing where to go to get that support. You talked about emotional support, but even things like knowing where the local GP surgery is, knowing where the local supermarket is. You need someone there with you, certainly in those first few sensitive weeks until the refugee family is settled, to really support them and in a way kind of hold their hand through it until they feel kind of up to sort of tackling it themselves. And so I think we need to just be a little bit careful about the narrative here of, you know, our politicians aren't bothering to use their second homes for Ukrainian families, when actually there's a lot more nuance to it than that, isn't there, Paul?
Yeah, and I have to say, I mean, you know, you gave an explanation of your personal situation there, Deanna. I don't think anyone should be compelled to feel they have to give an explanation, MP or otherwise. As we've said, people have all manner of different personal circumstances which will determine whether or not they're able to accommodate a refugee. And if they conclude that they can, great. If they conclude that it wouldn't be practical, then they're perfectly entitled to come to that judgment without any condemnation. It is, as far as I'm concerned, a very, very personal decision to be taken by individuals and their families, and it's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm. Well, send us your views. If you're watching, have you registered with the scheme? Are you going to be taking in a Ukrainian family? Send us your thoughts on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. Now, this week, Prime Minister Boris Johnson headed to Saudi Arabia in a bid to secure more bilateral trade with the nation, following a halt in Russian oil imports after Putin's invasion of Ukraine at the start of last month. The EU, Washington and London plan to back the Russian leader into a corner with their continuing sanctions and economic pressures. But where one door shuts, another must open, surely. Arlene, over to you on this. Do you think this trip is a sign of continuing global uncertainty on energy production because of the ongoing war in Ukraine, or do you think it's deeper than that about the UK and Saudi's kind of ongoing relationship?
Well, Saudi Arabia, and Paul referenced this earlier, is one of our, in quotes, allies. I'm reminded of Lord Palmerston when he said there's no such things as eternal allies or permanent enemies. There's just one thing, and that's interests, and interests will always be eternal. And I mean, that's the reality. The Prime Minister has been confronted with what's happening in Ukraine. He has been advised that he therefore needs to look at his energy supply. I would argue, of course, that he should have been doing that a long time ago, and we should have been looking to our energy supply within the UK as a whole. In any event, he now has to look at where we get our energy from, and he's decided to speak to the Middle East. And the Middle East have for a long time UAE, Oman, Bahrain, all of these places have been allies, and we may or may not like it, but that is the reality. And we know that there are horrific things happening in some of those places. When the PM is confronted with that, he says, oh yes, I have raised that issue. I've spoken to the leaders about the fact that there are human rights abuses. But his primary objective and this may be difficult for some people to hear, his primary objective is not what's happening in that country, but actually what's happening in our own country and how he can protect our citizens and make sure that we have access to energy supplies.
Mm. And Paul, isn't there an argument that actually having an ongoing relationship and an ongoing dialogue with nations like Saudi Arabia actually allows us face-to-face to discuss some of these human rights abuses?
Well, that's the argument, isn't it? But you could equally say, well, that should be the argument for why we should engage with Putin, why we should engage with China. It just seems to me that this is just another example of the hypocrisy of Western foreign policy, which has been, going on now for decades and decades. And the irony that we don't want to become over-reliant on one particular foreign dictator who has attacked another country in terms of our energy supply reliance. So therefore, we're going cap in hand to Saudi Arabia, another tyrannical country, which is also prosecuting a war against a neighbouring country, Yemen, and which itself has a terrible human rights record. And, I just don't think that no amount of talk about realpolitik can get you out of an accusation of hypocrisy on that one, because it very clearly is hypocrisy. But it's nothing new, let's be honest. I mean, if you look at the history of the West, I mean, Turkey, for example, with a pretty poor human rights record, clamps down on free speech, is a NATO member. We backed Saddam Hussein before he invaded Kuwait in the war with Iran. We were on his side. The US will intervene in Latin American countries politically and economically if it doesn't like the particular government of the day. So as I say, it's just hypocrisy, and it should be called out.
Thanks, Paul. Well, again, send us your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, coming up after the break, we're discussing the P&O ferry saga in which 800 employees lost their jobs on the spot. Stay with us.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, welcome back to GB News. The political correction and your views have been flying in today. So on Russia-Ukraine, we've had a lot of people getting in touch. Firstly, Malcolm, who sort of agrees with the sentiment Paul was just expressing. Where was the help for refugees from Iraq, Syria, Libya and Afghanistan? Why did the government not ask for help from the British people? And why is there wall-to-wall coverage of the war in Ukraine? We all know why, don't we? Because they're not white European. I think this is something that we've discussed on the show in the past. James also says, Is Ukraine now part of the UK? We're addressed each day by their leader and told what to do, and thousands are told they can just walk into this country. Bill finally saying Putin now has no choice. He has to treat Ukraine the same way as he treated Chechnya. He can only save face by destroying all opposition and installing another warlord or gangster to control the remaining population. Arlene and Paul, I think you've got some views as well. Arlene, to
so
you first.
I'll go first then. Melvin says all reporting revolves around territory and security, but what is not spoken about is who pays for the rebuilding of what's left of Ukraine. Surely, whatever the outcome, Russia should pay for the damage this war has done. And I think that's something that has started to be talked about, actually, who's going to rebuild some of those beautiful cities in Ukraine. Kevin says, I think this is about Paul, to suggest that the UK conducted war crimes because he wanted to exercise his political right to express his views on the Iraq invasion is a fantastically evil statement. There we go. That's quite a strong view coming through there. And finally then, Bill says, for Biden to call this invasion a war crime takes hypocrisy to a whole new level. 460,000 people died during our Iraq atrocity, and my understanding is the fatalities are much lower in Ukraine, possibly because Russia have not taken the kid gloves off yet. I wouldn't call them kid gloves, but there we go.
And Paul, have you got a couple to read out there?
Yeah, I've got a couple here, Deanna. Anthony, on Ukraine, Anthony says, stop blaming Putin. The West has sold us out to this madness. First, the virus that broke our economy. Now, food and energy demands that will create the real suffering, and a war to finish things off. Wake up. And Kenneth says, you haven't shown one bit of interest of the barbarism against the people of Donbass in the last 8 years, and no one talks about it. It's NATO, US and UK who fueled this invasion.
Well, thank you for sending your views in. And as you know, here at GB News, we are the home of open debate. So we like to hear contrasting and conflicting views. So get in touch with us on gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, P&O Ferries is facing outrage this week after firing 800 crew members on the spot without warning and leaving travellers stranded. In a pre-recorded video, staff were informed they were losing their jobs with immediate effect to be replaced by cheaper agency workers. Protests were sparked across various ports in the UK, with the RMT union describing the move as one of the most shameful acts in the history of British industrial relations. Before we open the discussion, let's have a listen to what Transport Secretary Grant Shapps had to say to our very own GB News political correspondent, Tom Harwood.
We understand that companies have to make money, otherwise they can't be in business. I mean, no problem with companies making a profit. And we understand that they may have to make changes. You do not treat your staff in that way. Pre-recorded, 30 minutes notice on a Zoom to tell you you've lost your job, in many cases of decades, people who've been working for P&O Ferries.
So, Paul, as our sort of resident trade union expert here on GB News, I want to throw to you first. What have you made of this whole development?
Well, I mean, as you say, Deanna, I'm a trade unionist to my core, but I don't think you have to be a trade unionist particularly to understand what's going on here and how wrong it is. I mean, what has happened to those hundreds of workers at P&O is, in my view, absolutely despicable. And what we're seeing is something that's no better than gangster capitalism. These were, many of these people, as Grant Shapps said, had worked for a long time for the company, had given dedicated service over many years to that company. And to be told in a video call the day before that you're going to effectively be sacked and replaced with cheaper agency labour. I mean, I have to say, as someone with some basic knowledge of employment law, it strikes me, first of all, that is completely in breach of employment law. But just as a moral point of view, the idea that you should do that to people, especially P&O, a so-called reputable company that's well known, I think is absolutely despicable. And I think this dispute now has got the potential to go to the heart of a debate about how much we value our workers, what employment legislation we're prepared to enact in order to defend our workers from these sorts of unscrupulous bosses, and what we're prepared to do about it. And I'm really glad to see that the the trade union movement at large has come to the defence of these workers, and I hope that spreads, and I hope ordinary people take part in the process as well. Because, I mean, it doesn't seem to me that this company was on the brink of liquidation or on the brink of going out of business. I understand sometimes if a company is failing, it may have to take drastic measures, but even then you still consult with the workforce before doing that. This was a company that claimed £10 million in furlough during the pandemic. This is a company that's just handed £270 million to its shareholders. There is absolutely nothing defensible, in my view, in the actions of P&O. And I would like to see the government go even further and potentially suspend any government contracts that it's got, which I believe it has, because it needs, in my view, the most robust response to something like this, which has got no place in a modern workplace or in a modern economy or society.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that I'm probably a little bit concerned about coming out of this is that there might be renewed calls for a legislative ban on kind of so-called fire and rehire tactics, which is something that Parliament's already discussed. And you touched on it there, Paul, this point around sometimes in order to survive and not go under, businesses do have to restructure. I think clearly we can all agree that in P&O's case, that doesn't seem to have been the case whatsoever. But Paul, I'll just come to you briefly on this. Do you think that it is right that there should be a legislative ban on that? Or do you think we need to somehow toe a middle ground to make sure that businesses who are struggling do have that flexibility, particularly as if the business goes under, all those jobs are lost anyway, aren't they?
I think the problem is, Deanna, that it's not just businesses that are about to go under that are using these fire and hire tactics. I mean, I have to say, I've been in the public sector. I've been a victim of fire and rehire back in 2010, when, in my view, there was absolutely no business case for it at all. And I and thousands of my colleagues were threatened with the sack, effectively, unless we decided to come back on the new contracts that had been presented to us. And it seems to me to be a charter for unscrupulous employers, when it suits them, just to attack the pay and conditions of ordinary workers. And if you sign a contract of employment, in my view, you're entitled to expect that contract to be honoured. And as I said before, I accept we live in a market economy. I accept that there are times when businesses may fail. And of course, it's right and proper that we have robust redundancy measures in place for when that happens. But the number of employers who seem to be taking advantage of their ability to be able to fire and rehire in this way, for me, is completely wrong. And yes, I do support the legislative ban, and I think Parliament should enact it as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. Arlene, what about you? What's your stance on this?
Well, I can understand where Paul's coming from in relation to the workers, and of course it was completely outrageous, and Grant Shapps and members of Cabinet have all acknowledged that it was completely outrageous, and therefore that something has to happen. But I just wanted to raise two other issues in relation to this absolutely disgraceful action by P&O Ferries. P&O Ferries actually own Larne Harbour, and they have an issue there, and we have an issue here then in relation to our supply chain, because around 50% of our food goods come from GB. And we're told that P&O won't be running between GB and Northern Ireland now for 2 weeks. That, of course, is of grave concern for us here in relation to our supply issues. But secondly, the firm that owns P&O Ferries are, I understand, DP World. They're a Dubai-based organisation. And that's the organisation that have been involved in a lot of the free ports that have been designated around the UK. So that is of concern as well, because if this company thinks it's acceptable to treat their employees in the way that they have treated them, sacking them over Zoom, no consultation, just paying their way out of this situation, despite the fact, as Paul has said, they paid £270 million of a dividend in 2019. I think then that should be a matter of concern for the government as well in relation to structural issues moving forward, Deanna.
Mm-hmm. I think it's one of these that Grant Shapps and the rest of the transport team are going to be taking incredibly seriously moving forward, so watch this space. Now, on the political correction, we explore the work done by our members of Parliament, what they get up to on the ground and in Westminster to serve us as legislators and to serve the constituents who elect them. Now, this week, I am delighted to be joined by the Labour MP for Ealing Central and Acton, Dr Rupa Hook, to hear about her work in Parliament and her West London constituency. Rupa, thank you for joining us on the show this morning. So my first question...
Thanks for having me, Deanna.
Not at all. My first question is a little bit about your overall experience as an MP, because you were elected back in 2015. And I guess we can say it's been a pretty tumultuous period since then, with Brexit raging, with COVID, and now with the war in Ukraine. So my question is, what in your mind has been the sort of highest high of the job since then, and what's been the lowest low?
Do you know, it has been a topsy-turvy time, and in reality, I would only be just ending my first term, I guess, or, just starting the second. I've had 3, because we've had an election every other year, 3 times in that period, despite the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. So I think some of the individual highs are helping individual people, to be honest. So I think in my first year, I do a weekly, in fact, it's restarted again. For COVID, it stopped, and then for Omicron, it restarted in September last year, then it stopped for Omicron. So I do an advice surgery 2 hours every Friday. And I remember very early on, someone came in and they were a third-year PhD student from Syria. And because there was an asset freeze, that there were no money allowed to come in and out of Damascus, their third-year fees that they thought were paid by a scholarship to UCL, where they were doing their PhD here, hadn't come, and they were about to be chucked off their course and kicked out of the country. And everything they'd tried was drawing a blank. So I said to UCL, I'm going to raise this on the floor of the House. So it's an amazing honour and privilege, you know this, Henna, that you're able to do that. And they weren't listening to her, so I did this, and in business questions, in fact. And then very quickly, UCL relented. They said that they've waived the fees because she had other friends in other universities where they'd done this. So she was able to continue. She was saved from a war zone. So, I mean, that's my first early high, I remember. And there've been bits and pieces like that along the way. Lowest low, probably the 2019 election, when we went down to our lowest number of seats since 1935. Although it brought you in, which is, on balance, nice to have more funky young people around. It looked really serious for the Labour Party, and it looked like we were on the brink of extinction for a minute.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Everyone that we speak to for this segment, always, whenever we ask what the highs are, it's always one of those personal stories and about how you've been able to help an individual. And I think that says so much about the way in which we do this job, doesn't it? I mean, people think it's about the theatricality and what you kind of see in PMQs and in the chamber, but actually, so much of the job isn't like that at all, is it?
Yeah, big time. I mean, the one I did on Friday, I had a sixth form student helping out, and she said, I had no idea you guys do this. It was very humbling to see. And again, we had a wide range of cases. There was someone who'd got out of Ukraine. I'm thinking of raising this one in the House. But they haven't finished their medical degree, so they want to transfer credits, and they were 90% there. Mm-hmm. There was an Afghanistan case, all sorts, the usual housing repairs. People show you horrendous pictures of their ceiling falling in on their phone or whatever. A lot of it is seriously unglam. People just know PMQs, which is 40 minutes on a Wednesday. That's a tiny chunk of our lives. I mean, I'm off canvassing at 11 in a second. So it's a 7 days a week full-on job, and people just don't know the whole extent of it. They just think lazy fat cats, pay rises, blah, blah, blah. It's not like that.
Oh, yeah, we get that accusation quite a lot. Like I want to touch on that point about PMQs. I think people seem to think that often it's difficult for MPs of one party or one colour rosette to kind of get along with MPs from other parties. But that's so not the case, is it? There is so much cross-party work that goes on. And I saw your column with Matt Hancock actually recently about how we need more compassion in politics. It was fantastic. And just talk to us about cross-party working, about how important it is.
Yeah, I mean, actually, the Matt Hancock column came out of, I did the closing eulogy in the David Amos tributes. And my last line was, we all need to be a bit more David. We should all be a bit less cross and more cross-party. And, we all want the same thing for our constituents, which is, the best for our local area, that kind of thing. But as you say, people just see the Yarbu oppositional thuggery of PMQs. And behind the scenes, we have a lot of APPGs, all-party parliamentary groups. And you do, especially with a Conservative majority of 80, you do have to work with other parties. I think one of my colleagues who's no longer there said in 2017, she's never going to talk to a Tory. I mean, that's just bonkers. They've been in power for 12 years. You can't get along with not talking to another Tory. So, yeah, a lot of alliances are forged. And Matt Hancock came up to me after that thing and said, that was really good. Let's make something happen out of this. So actually, Dehenna, you could be involved too. I'll talk to you tomorrow about this at length.
Brilliant.
We're doing an edited collection of essays by MPs from different parties about more compassion in politics, more understanding. You know, we're all human beings. But there is, even the very nature of the building, the fact that you're in a face-off with the other side, breeds this oppositional culture. The whole thing of PMQs is to shout down the other lot as loud as you can. And it's just not a sensible way for mature decision-making in a democracy.
No, I completely agree with you. And as for the essay collection, yeah, we'll have a chat, and you may have found a new recruit here here today.
Good.
I kind of want to talk about your point there about kind of having to work with the government, the Conservative government, because, you know, we are there. But also, how does that contrast with working alongside devolved body in London on things like transport? How do you kind of manage the two?
Yeah, no, good point. Because a lot of times when I ask about transport sort of things, they say, oh, it's all your Labour mayor's fault. I mean, there's different levels of government, and central government funds the Mayor of London, so it's complicated. But look, I would say that throughout both COVID and the Ukraine crisis, there's been unanimity on a lot of stuff. And again, I get Labour Party members saying, when are the gloves going to come off? When are you going to start attacking them more? But for a moment of national crisis, like a war on mainland Europe, you know, it's not the time for party politics and bickering. And, you know, people want to see their government succeed in a pandemic as well. So, you know, there's a time and a place for everything. But you're right about the devolved bodies. We see it as well with the SNP, don't we? That I think we're both united in this one, Dehenna, as unionist parties. We think we're stronger together. Yeah, I mean, yeah, as a London MP, it does feel extremely frustrating that if you ask any question, a minister will say, oh, it's all Sadiq Khan's fault. Whereas actually, you know, things like London Transport, to be fair, there used to always be a central government grant for that. And then it stopped in 2016 under George Osborne. And I do feel that's a little bit mean because we've got a Labour mayor now. I think, you know, we need sustainable long-term solutions. It shouldn't just be election to election, oh, who's in power now, let's be a bit nasty and cut the funding. I mean, London Transport is surviving, but it seems that we have these very hand-to-mouth settlements. There's always an 11th hour sort of negotiation, and then the buses do continue to run. But I mean, again, their fares have been down massively. They're very fare reliant because they don't have a huge central government grant. And with COVID, people haven't been travelling. So, yeah, it's complicated, as Facebook would say.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about some of your actual campaigns that you've run. There's one that really sort of grasped my imagination that I know you and I discussed, and that was around banning protest outside abortion clinics. And you had a private members bill on that. Tell us about how that went.
Yeah, actually, that's another proud moment as well, because we had a massive majority. I think you were on side as well, Dehenna. Most people were. I think only 30 people, we do have 650 MPs, voted against it. So this is nothing to do with abortion and the number of weeks and that, but it is legal in this country, has been since 1968. So women who want to avail themselves of abortion clinics find that they're not able to get in the door of these buildings. And it's an unusual one because in this country, it's done in standalone clinics a lot. I think in Scotland, the SNP, I couldn't get on board with this campaign because they said it's in hospitals, it's entirely separate. It's not, people don't get targeted in the same way. So what you have in England and Wales is standalone abortion clinics. And so women using those services, it's very clear what they're there for. So they face a barrage of protesters. At the moment, I think in the run-up to Lent, there's a group called 40 Days for Life that are doing a 40-day running protest at dozens of clinics around the country. Yeah, and the whole idea of that is just to shame women about their personal choices. It's legal. They should be allowed to access healthcare in anonymity like you would with anything else, with any other operation. So what has happened actually in my local authority in Ealing is that they made, because there'd been a 25-year protest, it had been going on for ages at the clinic we have. So they'd made a bylaw, local authority bylaw, where there's a 150-metre radius around the clinic. So you can protest at the edges of it, but just not at the clinic gates. And again, there's more appropriate places to do this protest, maybe at the House of Commons or at the Council Chamber or wherever, because it's legislators who can change this, but not the women who may have had to have it for all sorts of reasons. They could have been raped or had fatal fetal abnormality or all sorts of horrible stuff. But this sort of judgment, this judgy thing with the anti-abortion campaign is, just really intimidating. And every woman should be able to use public spaces free from harassment and intimidation. So actually, Priti Patel was pretty keen on this, and I'm due a meeting with her to discuss it further. And again, that's one I worked with Bernard Jenkin on. We had an amendment we co-sponsored. So,
we'll have to get you back on to talk about it in more detail, Rupa, when we've got a little bit more
let's do it. And I won't have got out of bed. I'll be in the studio. We'll do it properly next time.
Absolutely. Well, Rupa, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and I hope to welcome you on the channel again very soon.
Okay, see you soon.
Now, stay with us, because coming up after the break, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe returns to the UK after 6 years of detention in Iran. Joe Biden insults Irish people on St Patrick's Day and gets Boris Johnson's job title wrong. And we want to know who is the most exciting person who follows you on social media. Let us know and get involved with all our stories by emailing us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweeting us at GBNews. This is a political correction, so don't go anywhere.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, you're watching GB News, and coming up on the political correction this hour. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe returns back to her family in the UK after years of detention in Iran. Joe Biden makes yet another gaffe, and we discuss your most exciting social media followers, so let us know at gbviews@gbnews.uk. That plus plenty more after the latest news.
Good morning, it's 2 minutes past 11 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Russian forces have bombed an art school where about 400 people were taking shelter in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol. There's no word yet on casualties, but the city council confirmed that the building was destroyed, adding there were victims still under the rubble. President Zelensky described the horror of the attack in an address to the nation.
The blockade of Mariupol will go down in history of responsibility for war crimes. To do what the occupiers did to a peaceful city is a terror that will be remembered for centuries to come. And the more Ukrainians tell the world about it, the more support we find. The more Russia uses terror against Ukraine, the worse the consequences will be for it.
President Zelensky there. The Prime Minister is urging China to join the global community in its disapproval of the war in Ukraine. Boris Johnson believes some of President Xi Jinping's team is having second thoughts about Beijing's neutral position on the invasion. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is also facing fierce criticism after comparing the struggle of Ukrainians fighting Russian forces to Britain's voting for Brexit. Here's what he said at the Tory party spring conference yesterday.
And I know that it's the instinct of the people of this country, like the people of Ukraine, to choose freedom every time. When the British people voted for Brexit in such large numbers, I don't believe it was because they were remotely hostile to foreigners. It's because they wanted to be free, to do things differently, and for this country to be able to run itself.
6 people have been killed and 10 others seriously injured when a car ploughed into a crowd in Belgium. The incident happened in a small village about 30 miles south of the capital, Brussels. Police say the vehicle was driven at high speed into a group of carnival performers who were preparing for a parade. 2 people have been arrested. The incident has not thought to be terror-related. Detectives have launched a manhunt following the murder of a teenager in central London. Police say early indications suggest 22-year-old Meher Marouf had been in a relationship with the 19-year-old woman and that they'd been together that evening. She was found with serious neck injuries at a student accommodation in Clerkenwell, but died in the scene. Millions of people in England will begin to be offered COVID booster jabs this week. The NHS says the vaccine will be available to care home residents, those over 75 and the immunosuppressant aged 12 and over. 5 million people are expected to be given the jab. A funeral has been held for the Australian cricket legend Shane Warne. Family and friends, including retired Australian Test captain Mark Taylor and the former England skipper Michael Vaughan, attended a private service in Melbourne. The 52-year-old died just over 2 weeks ago while on holiday in Thailand. A post-mortem found he died of natural causes. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge will learn about efforts to preserve Belize's barrier reef as they continue their Caribbean tour. William and Kate spent time with the country's Prime Minister at the beginning of their 8-day trip to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Their visit hasn't been without controversy, though, with some residents protesting against the royal couple's helicopter landing site. A toy company in Chicago has raised over £110,000 for Ukraine by selling President Zelensky Lego figurines. The unofficial Zlego toys went on sale with a price tag of £75 and sold out within hours. All funds from the sales will go towards medical aid for Ukraine. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to the political correction.
Good morning, you're watching GB News and this is the political correction. We're here for the next hour to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. It's not about journalists talking to journalists, it's about you telling us what you think. And coming up this hour, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe returns back to her family in the UK after years of detention in Iran. Joe Biden makes another gaffe, this time insulting Irish people, and gets Boris Johnson's job title wrong. And we have common ground with Reverend Canon Gavin Ashanden. And we want to know, who is the most exciting person who follows you on social media? Let us know and get involved with all our stories by emailing me on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweeting us at gbnews. This is... This week, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe returned home to her family in the UK after years of detention in Iran. 6 years ago, Nazanin flew to Iran, taking her daughter Gabriella to meet her grandparents. But she was imprisoned whilst there and was subsequently used as a diplomatic pawn by the Iranian authorities. A historic debt was paid to Iran amounting to £400 million, which some say has been a key step in securing her release. So, Arlene, let's start with the positive of this. This is great news for Nazanin and her family. What did you make of the photographs, seeing them reunited?
It was amazing, and the little girl, of course, is only about 8, so she was very tiny when her mum went into detention. And whilst Nazanin did on occasion see her daughter in Iran, my goodness, the photographs were incredible to see that little girl staring at her mum, not quite believing that her mother was at home again. So I do wish them all the best. I hope they have time together now as a family. I hope that the media do leave them alone, that we all leave them alone. I think we all want to hear how they're getting on, but I do think they need some time. Yeah, and one of the things that struck me when we were discussing this over this past couple of days has been the fact that whilst Nazanin was a very high-profile detainee, there are numerous others who are still being detained in Iran. And indeed, there was another detainee released with Nazanin, Anushi Azuri. He's a 67-year-old British-Iranian businessman. He'd been detained for 5 years. And we don't hear about these other detainees, and I'm not taking away from the campaign that Nazanin's family led, a fabulous campaign, one that brought it to international attention. But there are so many others as well being detained in Iran, and it is so wrong. And the government need to deal with that issue. And there comes the question. The fact that £400 million has been paid, we're told, for a historic debt, not as a ransom payment, we're told by the government, but as a historic debt. You have to ask the question, what are we doing now to ensure that A, this doesn't happen again, that others aren't put into detention, but how do we get those others who are currently in detention free and back to their families again?
Well, Paul, this has been a mammoth mission by diplomats and kind of foreign ministers of various sort of generations and governments, hasn't it? What did you make of the news that Nazanin was finally being released?
Well, it was wonderful news, and what happened to her, and what, as Arlene has pointed out, has happened to other people incarcerated over there was an appalling injustice, indefensible for her to have been imprisoned and detained like that. And thank goodness that this wife and mother is now back where she belongs with her family. I mean, I must say I have one nagging question. I mean, the £400 million that we've paid, which I have no particular quibble about, because as I understand it, an international tribunal decided some years ago that we were liable for this debt, which kind of begs the question to me, why did it take so long to settle it? If so much hinged in terms of Nazanin's release on the payment of this debt, then I don't really understand why it took so many years for us to accept our responsibilities to pay it. But I guess, those are questions for another day. And the main thing that we can do at the moment is just rejoice in the fact that she's home where she belongs.
Yeah, absolutely. And a huge welcome back to Nazanin. But as Arlene said there are others, aren't there, around the world who have been sort of taken hostage and are in very similar positions. And I think one of the difficulties is that obviously we don't get to see, for obvious reasons, for security reasons, how those negotiations kind of play out until we hopefully get a positive result, as we have with Nazanin. But again, I just think pay tribute to the hard work of the sort of diplomats, ministers and all those in the Foreign Office who've been working so hard on this and finally got the result. But as you rightly said there, Arlene, the campaign as well that was run by Nazanin's family, Richard, her husband, all over the news very frequently in Downing Street and in Westminster, engaging with policymakers and the extended family as well. Just absolutely an incredible display from the family, wasn't it?
It was amazing, but you'd like to think that your spouse would do that if you were incarcerated in Iran, and that they would do all that they could. And I have to say, I don't think Richard Ratcliffe has any regrets about any of the campaigning that he engaged in, and he shouldn't have any regrets, because he was making his voice heard everywhere. It didn't matter what sort of MP you were, where you came from. I know, for example, he was speaking to my former colleagues in the DUP on a regular basis as well. So he really, if you wanted to hear about Nazanin's plight, he was going to raise it with you. So congratulations to him. I know it's not what he wants to hear, but I do congratulate him. And I do hope, and there will be challenges ahead, because this is a lady who has spent 6 years in detention. She's now coming home to her freedoms, and I hope they get all the support and love that they need to get through the next couple of months.
Mm-hmm. Paul, anything else you want to add there?
No, I just concur. I mean, I think we were all in awe of the campaign that was run by her husband. I mean, Arlene just posed the question there. We'd like to think all of our spouses would do such a thing. I'm going to check as soon as the show finishes that is the case. That's another nagging question I've now got in my mind. But yeah, rejoice at the fact that the campaign has proved successful, and as I say, back where she belongs with a young daughter and her family.
Absolutely. Now, moving on, because this week, US President Joe Biden made another questionable gaffe during a virtual St. Patrick's Day event with the Irish Taoiseach Michael Martin, quipping, "I may be Irish, but I'm not stupid." The comment has ruffled feathers in Ireland and amongst Irish communities across the United States. The President also raised eyebrows by incorrectly referring to Boris Johnson as the Prime Minister of England, effectively excluding 3 out of the 4 nations of the UK from his remarks. Let's take a look now at what he said.
Bless me, Father, for I'm about to sin. Well, I just want you to know, I may be Irish, but I'm not stupid. I married Dominic Giacoppa's daughter. Okay?
Okay, Arlene, I want to come to you first. When you saw that clip, what was your reaction, dare I ask?
Well, it's difficult to know where to start with Joe Biden, isn't it? I mean, I think that for those of us who are Northern Irish, but who are also British, we are essentially being gaslighted by the President of the United States. He doesn't really recognise that unionists exist in Northern Ireland. You could see him on that frame there at the Speaker's lunch, crossing himself before he spoke, saying that he was, you know, he may be Irish, but he's not stupid. Which, frankly, if I was a big proponent, Irish-American proponent of Biden, I would be absolutely outraged by. He then went on to talk about the Prime Minister of England. Sorry, he's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. But, you know, this isn't the first time that we've had this sort of rhetoric from Biden. You may recall when he was once stopped by the BBC for an interview, he said, "Sorry, who are you?" And they said, "Well, we're the BBC." And he said, "No, I'm Irish." And he walked up. So basically saying he didn't want anything to do with the British Broadcasting Corporation. And then when Enda Kenny was Taoiseach in the Republic of Ireland and he was Vice President, Biden was Vice President, he made the comments that it was only green that was welcome here. He didn't really want any orange, which of course is my community and my background. So he does sort of have this Gaelic green fest where he gaslights unionists. We don't really exist. And I think actually we're back in the 1980s when it comes to the administration's understanding of what happens in Northern Ireland. Of course, the majority of people in Northern Ireland want to remain within the United Kingdom. And my message to President Biden, and indeed to Irish America in general, is that we exist, we will continue to exist, and we're not going away.
Paul, one of the things that I'm curious about is this was a pretty daft gaffe from Joe Biden, wasn't it? And yet there doesn't seem to have been much kind of coverage or uproar. And I'm curious if you think if it had been Donald Trump that had done this, would there have been that uproar?
There would have been uproar. It's because he is so liberal and left. That's why he's a lovey. Ridiculous.
Paul?
Yeah, I suspect that the reaction would have been different if Trump said it. I mean, it was clearly a crazy thing to say. I'm Irish, but I'm not stupid. I think it's what they call a self-refuting statement, because clearly he was stupid to say it. And it's interesting listening to Arlene in terms of the perception of unionists of what Biden says and how he likes, as he does, to assert his Irishness. And I think particularly given the relationship of the UK, there's a delicate balance to be struck there. I mean, look, on one level, it's a good thing that he feels comfortable about asserting his Irishness and his Catholicism, because I think if you go back to the 1960s, for example, when JFK was the president, he actually suffered quite a lot of anti-Catholic bigotry during his period as a politician, and in some cases was quite reluctant to emphasise that part of his background, whereas with Biden he's comfortable about it, which shows in many respects that we've moved on from those days, which is of course a good thing. But equally, as Arlene said, there's also a unionist community in Britain which is proud of its traditions and of its roots, and you would expect any American president to have cognizance of that in the context of trying to keep the so-called special special relationship special. I don't think it is particularly special, but they do.
Mm-hmm. I think it's easy to sort of laugh at the gaffe, but actually, Arlene, as you sort of highlighted there are some potentially pretty serious consequences of this. And Biden went on to make some inaccurate comments about the Good Friday Agreement. What did you make of that?
Well, I mean, he gave the speech, I think it was the next day, he gave the speech actually basically saying that the Good Friday Agreement was the basis of peace in Northern Ireland. Don't have a problem with that, but that the Good Friday Agreement cannot be changed. Well, anybody that has studied what happens in Northern Ireland know that the Belfast Agreement, as we would identify it, has been changed on numerous occasions, most notably in 2006 after a serious period of negotiations, ending with the St Andrews Agreement of 2006. And there's been numerous other agreements. As you know, talks happen quite frequently in Northern Ireland. And for him to say it hasn't been changed, it has been changed. And it's been changed because it needed to be changed. And this is his fundamental problem. There's a misunderstanding of the Good Friday/Belfast Agreement, not just in America, in Europe as well, as to what it means. The fundamental point of the Belfast Agreement is that the people of Northern Ireland had the right to determine whether they wanted to stay within the United Kingdom or whether they wanted to have a border poll in relation to moving away from that status. People miss that completely. They read all sorts of other things into it. Sinn Féin use it as a tool to push for a united Ireland. That's not what the Belfast Agreement was about. I voted against the Belfast Agreement for numerous other reasons, but on the constitutional point, it was very clear that we stayed in the United Kingdom until the people of Northern Ireland decided otherwise. And I wish people would recognise that, including the President of the United States.
Do you think we need to get better at talking about the kind of history around the Northern Ireland question, how we've got to here and what the implications are on the ground? Because we cover it quite extensively here on GB News, but it's not something we tend to see much coverage of, is it?
No, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to get involved in GB News, actually, Deanna, because I felt that people on the mainland didn't really understand. And I know it's complicated in Northern Ireland, what has happened there since 1970s and indeed further back. But it is important that we understand the basics, and the basics of the Belfast Agreement are very clear, that we remain in the United Kingdom until the people of Northern Ireland decide otherwise. It then goes on to talk about relationships north-south and relationship east-west. And it's the east-west relationship, of course, that has been fundamentally damaged by the Northern Ireland Protocol, which was agreed by the United Kingdom government and the European Union. And therefore, there's a need for us to fix that east-west fracture that is there at this present moment in time. And that's part of the Belfast Agreement as well, and something that isn't often talked about.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess as part of our GB News dedication in trying to sort of demystify, we're going to be covering this after the break and talking about the latest developments in the Northern Ireland Protocol. So stay with us to discuss that. We'll hear more from Arlene there. We'll also have our Common Ground feature with Reverend Canon Gavin Ashanden. And let us know, who is the most exciting, cool person who follows you on social media? Tell us by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. And we'll be back after the weather.
But looking ahead to the weather for you, and it's going to be a chilly start, then fine and sunny for most, a bit cooler than yesterday. So let's have a look at the details.
In the southwest, there's going to be some cloud around, meaning it won't be as sunny as Saturday, and the odd spot of rain is possible, but it won't be as windy either.
Only a little fair weather cloud bubbling up across the southeastern London. Plenty of spring sunshine again, not as warm.
There'll also be lots of sunshine for much of Wales, though notice towards Pembrokeshire, there may be some nagging cloud throughout the morning.
It's going to be a mostly sunny day again for the Midlands. Not much cloud about. Winds will be lighter than yesterday, but temperatures down a couple of degrees.
Plenty of spring sunshine across the northeast this lunchtime with barely a cloud in the sky. Similar for the rest of the country. It will be a touch cooler, though, than of late.
It is a similar picture as we head north to Scotland. Some eastern parts a little bit cloudier, but for most there'll be plenty of sunshine on offer.
A band of cloud is going to sweep eastwards across parts of Northern Ireland. There we go. And here there may even be a little rain, though most places will stay dry. Remaining sunny for most this afternoon, but cloud and a little rain pushing into the far west and far east. And that is how your weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis, and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that had been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here. Joe Biden walking out. Thank you very much for joining us. Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. And as always, we've had plenty of your views coming in, a lot specifically about Ofcom and Russia today. So James says, isn't their action the same as Russian state TV? You can only hear one side of the story. Censorship is never good as we start to think, what is our government hiding? And Adrian there sharing a quote, I disapprove of what you say, but I'll defend to your death your right to say it. Arlene?
So, yes, RT, again, coming up a lot. RT is broadcasting on Rumble, Odyssey, and via their website as normal. The ban was pointless. Sad to say I don't know what Rumble or Odyssey is. Some of the young people might be able to assist me with that. Over to you, Paul.
Don't ask. I'll ask my kids later.
And Paul, you've got some views there as well.
I have, yeah, I've got some here, Deanna. John says on RT, shutting down RT is censorship. Balanced argument is all we want. Philip says, are some of your viewers seriously suggesting that we allow the poisonous propaganda of a belligerent state to be broadcast in the middle of a war and the deaths of thousands of innocent people? And Jean says, I take RT and all media with a pinch of salt. I still get it online if I want it. Actually, I see interesting news about our country on TRT and Al Jazeera. We're old enough to decide for ourselves. And finally, Colin says, what evidence is there of disinformation on RT? Their programmes are very balanced and it has interviews of right-wingers such as John Bolton. They give opposing views in their news broadcasts. The suspension of RT is clearly political.
Mm-hmm. Well, interesting ones, and do keep them coming in. Now, as we said just before the break, we'd be back to Northern Ireland, and earlier this week, a hotly anticipated legal ruling on the Northern Ireland Protocol was released. The Northern Ireland Court of Appeal decided that the protocol takes legal precedence over Article 6 of the Act of Union 1800, which demands all of the UK to be on an equal footing when it comes to trade. The protocol was met with reprisals from Conservative MPs and Unionists after customs legislation changed United Kingdom to Great Britain, which ostracises Northern Ireland from its wording. So what is next for Northern Ireland in this protocol saga? And what impact could this outcome have for the future of the Union? Arlene, I imagine pretty disappointed by the results on Tuesday.
Yeah, disappointed, not entirely surprised. I think we always believed, and I'm one of the applicants in the case, that this would go to the Supreme Court because it is a constitutional issue. What we're dealing with here is the Act of Union of 1800, which of course is in the sort of roots of our very being as a United Kingdom. The intolerable situation, of course, that Northern Ireland finds itself in at the moment is that Great Britain is outside of the European Union. Our nearest neighbours, the Republic of Ireland, are very much inside the European Union, and we're really in limbo land between the two. And this Court of Appeal ruling really doesn't clear that up. It said that the Parliament, through voting for the withdrawal agreement, which of course includes the protocol, really took the decision to move away, or I think they say suspend Article 6 for the time of the operation of the protocol. But interestingly, they also said that when they look at the drafting of the Northern Ireland Protocol, they believe that it was only ever meant to be temporary. So if that is the case, what is our government doing to make sure that we deal with the very fundamental issues of the Northern Ireland Protocol and move to a situation where we also in Northern Ireland get the benefits of leaving the European Union? Because that's why I, as a former economy minister, wanted to leave the European Union. I felt it was a good way to encourage entrepreneurship, innovation, free from the shackles of European regulation. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to take advantage of that because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. So it will go to the Supreme Court, but we also need our government to be much more engaged. There were some reports on Friday that Liz Truss was going to move to trigger Article 16, but we feel like the Grand Old Duke of York over here in Northern Ireland. We've been up at the top of that hill so many times now that I think people are sceptical that the government are actually going to deal with this issue in the very near future.
Well, we'll continue to cover this, and of course, when we have that Supreme Court case, if it makes it there, then we'll cover that extensively and can talk about it in more detail then, Arlene. And moving on, because on Thursday, Leah Thomas made history by becoming the first known transgender woman to win an NCAA swimming championship. The University of Pennsylvania senior is a former male swimmer for Penn before transitioning back in 2019. There were some protests outside the Georgia Tech facility, and banners were raised reading "Save Women's Sport." So, Paul, I want to come to you first on this. I think the trans debate can sometimes get very heated, can't it? But what did you make of Leah winning that championship?
Well, it's a travesty, let's be honest about it, and it is frankly indefensible. I mean, this was a person who as recently as 2 years ago was swimming for the men's team and competing in the men's category, but not doing terribly well, and then decided that he's actually a woman and began competing in the women's category, and he's now storming to victory. And, you know, my thoughts really are with those women swimmers who have dedicated their lives to becoming as good as they can be at their chosen sport, and who are just not being allowed now to compete on a fair footing. And what strikes me, Deanna, is most people know this is completely insane. Let's be blunt about it. Most people know it's wrong and it's indefensible and it's actually bizarre. But there is a culture of cowardice at the top of society in America as well as in Britain, I think, where people are simply petrified of calling it out. People are petrified of saying, well, look, this person is in reality a biological man and it's wrong that he should be allowed to compete in a women's event and win that canter as he did a couple of days ago. Because they know the reaction will probably be furious. There will be a vocal minority who will get on their case and will try to cancel them and will contact their employer and try to get their employer to take action against them. Well, at some point, people have got to stand up about it. Now, I'm not saying we go out of our way to be gratuitously offensive to people like Leah Thomas Thomas and others. Of course, we need to be respectful in how we debate these things, but there are some things, I think, where you can't compromise. And the idea of men in women's sport putting those women at a disadvantage simply because we want to appease people who are fundamentally woke, we need to draw a line and say that's wrong. And I hope we start doing it soon, frankly.
I think I take a much more kind of nuanced view, Paul. I mean, clearly there are issues around kind of biological advantages. But I think my concern is that we are potentially creating a culture in sport whereby trans people can't compete. There's kind of no place for them. There's actually a really interesting article in the Mail today from Sharon Davies, a former Team GB swimmer, who says we need to take this more nuanced approach and perhaps even look towards creating a new category of elite sport, which is kind of more inclusive for trans athletes. I think this is the problem. We need to kind of get away from it being an either or debate and try and find some kind of middle ground to make sure that everyone is included, everyone can compete, but compete fairly. I think that's what I'd like to see. But unfortunately, this debate gets so heated sometimes that it's impossible to do it and to debate in a kind of fair and calm way. Anyway, we'll move on. Send us your views. Coming up after the break, we have our Common Ground segment with Canon Gavin Ashanden, and we discuss your most exciting followers on social media. So let us know who those are on gbviews at gbnews.uk. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, it's 11:34. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Mariupol City Council says thousands of Ukrainians have been taken by force across the border to Russia. An art school in the city where around 400 people were taking shelter has also been bombed. There's no word yet on casualties, but the City Council confirmed that the building was destroyed, adding there were victims under the rubble. 6 people have been killed and 10 others seriously injured when a car ploughed into a crowd in Belgium. The incident happened in a small village about 30 miles south of the capital, Brussels. Police say the vehicle was driven at high speed into a group of carnival performers who were preparing for a parade. 2 people have been arrested. The incident is not thought to be terror-related. Detectives have launched a manhunt following the murder of a teenager in central London. Police believe 22-year-old Meher Marouf had been in a relationship with the 19-year-old woman who was found with serious neck injuries at a student accommodation in Clerkenwell yesterday. Millions of people in England will begin to be offered COVID booster jabs this week. The NHS says the vaccine will be available to care home residents, those over 75 and the immunosuppressant aged 12 and over. 5 million people are expected to be given the jab. TV, online and DAB plus radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. The political correction will be back in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. Sunday is a special day for Christians, but we acknowledge that faith comes in all shapes and sizes. So each week here on The Political Correction, we aim to talk to someone at the heart of his or her community to talk about what brings us together, in other words, our common ground. And this week, our very own Arlene Foster spoke with Canon Gavin Ashanden, Catholic layman and writer, about the big issues facing us today. Let's hear what he had to say.
So I'm delighted to say that this morning we're joined by Gavin Ashanden. Gavin is British Catholic layman, author and commentator. Gavin, what have you been thinking about this weekend?
I think one of the things that's troubled me most is the morality of international politics, because the way in which the media, at any rate, present some of the issues we're dealing with is to present everything in black and white terms, as we know who the goodies are and who the baddies are. And this was always problematic. Anyone involved in law or politics knows that you only have to lift the surface of things a bit and you suddenly discover some contrary indicators underneath. But it's much more problematic today in a way that I really don't yet understand. What I mean is that we've had 2 years of COVID with an extraordinary mono narrative in the media. And now we've got this dreadful conflict between the Ukraine and Russia. And there are always two sides to everything, but we only ever get one side. And that's not saying I want to pick one side over the other. It's just saying I feel enormously uncomfortable. So I thought rather than discuss Russia and the Ukraine for the moment, I'd go instead to Iran, to Mrs. Zaghari-ratcliffe, because she's been released and many of us have been praying for her and for the family for some time, because the situation she faced was simply a nightmare and utterly terrible, separated from her daughter, whom she'd only seen for the first 12 months, from her amazingly courageous husband. And then suddenly she's been released. And we were never quite told in the beginning that she was being held as a ransom hostage for £400 million, but slowly it became clear. And this was a debt going back to 1979. Well, now, we've paid the debt. I'm glad I'm not a politician, because I wouldn't know how on earth you value the life of an individual like that against sums of money that are inconceivable. But we paid the debt and she's free. The problem is, in terms of the morality, is that we now have access to Iranian oil, so that must be good for us. We're escaping Russian oil by choosing Iranian oil. But looking at what happens in Iran, it's no clearer to me that the Iranian oil is a more moral source of oil than the Russian oil was. And worse than that, the price appears to be give Tehran permission to gather together nuclear resources. The conditions are they don't do anything for 2.5 years. But in 2.5 years' time, one of the places that's going to be extremely nervous is Israel.
Yeah.
So this has been presented as a wonderful thing in the news, and thank God she's home with her family. But the idea that we're making good, wholesome moral choices in our international relations is just not acceptable. It's far more complex than that. And I'm not pointing the blame at anyone. I just wish that the way in which we tell the story of international politics would accept the fact that we're contrasting one dreadful situation with another dreadful situation.
And of course, that has been commented on by Tom Tugendhat, amongst others, who has said that the government has essentially paid a ransom, not just for Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe, but also for the second gentleman who was released as well, the 67-year-old businessman Anushi Azuri, who came home to the UK as well. Of course, the government says that the payment certainly was not contingent on freeing either of those two people. But it does bring us to the moral maze of international diplomacy, and I think that's the point you're trying to make, isn't it, Gavin?
Well, it is really, and I think I'd go beyond that to talk about the demonizing of Russians or the heroizing of Ukrainians. Russians and Ukrainian people they're both marvelous nations. They have their riches. They've both had terrible leaders as well as good leaders. The reputation of the Ukrainians after the Second World War was not one of the international highest for those who know something of the history of German prison camps. But that's the point. What we should be doing is not demonizing nations or cultures. removing Tchaikovsky from a concert program. We should be holding political leaders to account as they are, and not doing this easy, cheap, and frankly very dangerous notion of demonizing a whole people or even a whole culture. And it's just, I think what surprised me is there are so few voices in the media saying this. There are a few, of course, few sensible, wise people, and yet the whole thrust of the onslaught of our media presentation is to do this cheap, dangerous, and frankly utterly racist thing. Yeah. So we have such appalling double standards in this.
Well, it's something that we have been discussing on the political correction for a number of weeks now, the whole backstory to how we got to this position with Russia and Ukraine. But as you say, also in relation to the fact that whole peoples are being designated as Putin supporters, and Russians who are just simply trying to get on with their everyday lives are being targeted. But if we look then at your second issue, Gavin, you wanted to talk about the source of news and where we get our news from.
So there's always a cup half empty and a cup half full. I think one of the things I've most enjoyed is discovering Russell Brand. I was a great critic of him. I thought he was a very naughty, shallow, silly, clever, silly man. And I can't tell you how angry I got when he played that trick on poor Manuel. And left that awful message. I mean, he was off his head at the time. Of course he was. And I said to myself, I hope this man gets kicked out of public life forever. We never see him again. And yet, Russell Brand is turning out to be one of my saviors, politically that is, because he has this really very effective YouTube program. I think he's got over 5 million listeners now. It's quite clear he was always an intelligent man, but he's moved from a sort of zany Buddhist, pseudo-Buddhist spirituality in a direction that frankly attracts me greatly, which is closer and closer to Christianity, and more explicitly so. He's not a Christian yet, but what I'm encouraged by is the fact he's begun to see that everyone does have a philosophical or a spiritual or a moral lens on the world. And what we ought to be doing is choosing the one that works best. And I like the fact he's discovering this works best. What I also like is the fact that he's saying things that are wholly unacceptable in the rest of the media. And he's saying them by sourcing them and analyzing them and presenting them in a way that, because he's halfway between a left-wing radical and a kind of weirdo anarchist, just psychologically, he's not in bed with anybody, but instead what he's trying to do is to get to the truth. Now, there are very few sources of commentary in our news where you get that kind of raw integrity. Joe Rogan in the States is one of them, and I've watched a bit of him and I like him very much. And again, I'm astonished at the way in which they've been trying to close him down. So one of the reasons for bigging up Russell Brand is because I can't believe they're not going to try and close him down at some point. Yeah. And I've found him a very helpful source of the analysis of both sides of the argument in these very difficult recent months and years.
Well, it seems as if you've come full circle on Russell Brand, Gavin, and that's a very interesting story in and of itself. The third issue you wanted to raise was an issue from Scotland.
I've had such trouble with the idea of racism because although we've been talking about racism since I was a child, when people would put up horrid and unpleasant placards like no gypsies or no Irish or no Jews or no people of color, whatever. And these were obviously execrable, and everyone knew that they were. And it's wonderful they've been flushed out of our system. But the concept of racism has run away with this and has become immensely dangerous because it's essentially a thought crime. And what it suggests is that you can work out what someone's thinking in their head. And then as a Christian, I would say in their heart, from what they do and what they say. And the fact is people are more complex than that. And it's really, even Elizabeth I said she didn't want a window into men's souls. She didn't want the government to peer too deeply into the privacy of who we are and how we're motivated. But it becomes completely nonsensical. So one of the phobias that we've had belonging to racism is Islamophobia. And the extraordinary discovery in one of the Scottish council that actually many of the local Scots are not so much that they hate the English and they fear the English more than they hate and they fear Muslims, and that is it does two things to me. I mean, first of all, it's an indictment of our relationships with our neighbours, because really, of course we're in friendly rivalry, but actually we're all human beings living only a few hundred miles apart. And the other is that you just swap one form of, the moment you engage in public examination of racism, you tend to end up by swapping one form for another, in the sense that we're all racist, in that we all have the capacity to be prejudiced against other people. I very much like the Christian antidote to it. The Christian antidote simply is love your neighbor as yourself. And if you actually take that seriously, you can't be racist, or it works against any instinctive, flawed, racist tendencies any of us might be left with by the human condition. But the difference between saying, let's encourage each other to love each other by itself, and pointing the finger at racist hate crimes, catching the Scots for their anxiety about the English, or the English about the Scots, is, I think, ridiculous. One of the things I'd like to do in the public space is for us to give less time to the thought crime of racism, because I think in the end it's run away with us and it's become meaningless as a way of trying to improve the way in which we live together with our neighbours.
I never thought that we'd be discussing the so-called white privilege in this part of the programme, but I presume that you're not a big fan of white privilege either, Gavin.
Well, it carries with it a sting in the tail, because, I mean, words so often do this. It's a kind of, have you stopped beating your wife question.
Yeah.
Whatever answer you give, you're in trouble and you're wrong. And so the question shouldn't have been put like that. Whenever anyone talks about white privilege, I say, look, I'll accept white responsibility. I'll accept the fact that my forebears got to the scientific revolution first. And some of my forebears, actually, the best of them being the Scots, got to the industrial revolution and engineering quickest. And that's given us a degree, not of superiority, but of responsibility.
Yeah.
And once again, the problem with the diagnosis of social ills from the left is they always end up by giving you two things: guilt by association and taking away personal responsibility. So I'm very happy to own up to responsibility for having been given a generous education by some kind people and living in a part of the world where I've been resourced. So my responsibility then is to share that with other people. But to tell me that there's something intrinsically wrong with the group I was born into, actually that's a bit sick. And the shame is we should be calling this sickness out in public much more than we do.
And I presume, just to finish then, Gavin, that you weren't really impressed with Nicola Sturgeon's decision to pardon those witches that had been punished 500 years ago.
Well, that raises so many questions, but let's stick to the easy one. The easy one is retrospective legislation. I started as a law student once upon a time, and I wanted to be a lawyer. I remember the earliest rule was retrospective legislation stinks. It's always immensely dangerous. And I think that also applies to pardoning people who've lived an inconceivable long time ago for things that we have no idea about and couldn't judge if we had. The problem is what she's doing is it's a form of political virtue signaling.
Yeah.
And actually it's disrespectful to history, it's disrespectful to the earlier cultures. It's using people for political gain and advantage. And again, I'm afraid I think she should be called up on it and told, look, this is not an honourable way of leading a political life in our present day.
Gavin, thank you so much for joining us on Common Ground, where we try to find the common ground between all of our different faiths. Thank you so much.
Well, there, Gavin Ashanden joining us to share his reflections on current events. Now, earlier this week, our very own Paul Embry got a pleasant surprise when he was followed on Twitter by the one and only J.K. Rowling. The legendary author of the iconic Harry Potter series popped up on Paul's feed and left him slightly spellbound. On the back of this stupefying development, we've been asking who's the coolest person to follow you on Twitter. But first, Paul, what was your reaction like when you saw that notification pop up?
Well, I heard that J.K. Rowling is very discerning in who she follows on social media, so I guess I was I guess I was quite flattered. No, I mean, I can say that the kids were suitably impressed, that's for sure. But somebody on Twitter did say that she didn't intend J.K. Rowling to follow me at all. She just mistook me for an ageing Ron Weasley, which I thought was a little bit on the cruel side of things. But there you go. Yeah, I guess, you know, one of the best-selling authors in the world. I guess you have to be flattered, don't you?
Mm-hmm. So, Arlene, I'm curious, kind of, there are those moments, aren't there, when you see someone follow you, and most people, it's like colleagues or maybe political journalists or whatever, but then you'll get these random ones that kind of make you go, ooh, who's followed you that's kind of made you have that sort of reaction?
Well, Paul Embry, clearly. The man who has J.K. Rowling following him, I now have him following me, so that's very exciting. I'm taking that by association with Paul. I can have J.K. Rowling as well. No, come on, Paul. You were very excited about the fact that she followed you. Don't say it was just the children. It wasn't just the children. You were very excited about it. My goodness, if she followed me, I'd be tremendously excited as well. So, yeah, no, social media, you know, there are lots of faults in social media, and we know that we talk about them on this programme. But my goodness, the ability to be connected to people right across the world in that fashion, I think, is absolutely amazing. So we should celebrate that as a good positive from social media today.
Absolutely. I think for me, mine is not at all related to politics. I mean, when I first was starting out and you'd get sort of famous politicians following you, I used to find that really exciting. But the one that I got the most excited by ever is going to reveal my absolute nerdiness. It's a guy called Mark Miller, who, unless you're into your kind of comic books and superhero stuff, you may not have heard of, but he is a comic book genius, the writer of Kingsman and Kick-Ass and Jupiter's Legacy and so many other things. So he started following me, and I had a horrendous fangirl moment that I'm not very proud of. But I think that was my most exciting one. Come on, Paul, you must have had loads of others following you, Paul.
I recently had Hugh Grant follow me, actually, which was a little bit surprising because we don't exactly share the same politics. And my daughter, her favourite film is Notting Hill, so again, she was very suitably impressed with that. But other than that, you know, the standard fare of politicians and what have you, Deanna, yeah.
You're right, though, Arlene. It does make you very kind of interconnected, and you know, you made that joke there, that sort of degree of separation, so you're sort of only now one step removed from being followed by J.K. Rowling. But it's so true, isn't it? It really brings people together, and even one of my staff, who's absolutely fantastic, Ellie, the reason that I first got to know her was through Twitter. We got to know each other, we finally met in person, and now she works for me and is an absolute godsend. So we often talk about the downsides of social media and the kind of dark things that come with it, but it's great to be connected, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, Gavin Ashanden and Colin Grime was speaking there about the fact that he has rediscovered Russell Brand in a very positive way because he was very dismissive of him when he made that call about Andrew Sachs. You might recall it on the radio, and he was very bold in relation to all of that. But Gavin has rediscovered him because of his broadcasting, which of course is all done through social media. So, you know, I think we all have perceptions of people, don't we? And if we're following them, then we can see things that surprise us about different people. And hopefully we can continue to surprise people here on GB News with everything that we cover every week.
Absolutely. Well, that's all we've got time for here on The Political Correction. Join us next Sunday. And it would be remiss of me not to wish you all a very happy County Durham Day. Take care.
But looking ahead to the weather for you, and it's going to be a chilly start, then fine and sunny for most, a bit cooler than yesterday. So let's have a look at the details.
In the southwest, there's going to be some cloud around, meaning it won't be as sunny as Saturday, and the odd spot of rain is possible, but it won't be as windy either.
Only a little fair weather cloud bubbling up across the southeastern London. Plenty of spring sunshine again, not as warm.
There'll also be lots of sunshine for much of Wales, though notice towards Pembrokeshire, there may be some nagging cloud throughout the morning.
It's going to be a mostly sunny day again for the Midlands. Not much cloud about. Winds will be lighter than yesterday, but temperatures down a couple of degrees.
Plenty of spring sunshine across the northeast this lunchtime with barely a cloud in the sky. Similar for the rest of the country. It will be a touch cooler, though, than of late.
It is a similar picture as we head north to Scotland. Some eastern parts a little bit cloudier, but for most there'll be plenty of sunshine on offer.
A band of cloud is going to sweep eastwards across parts of Northern Ireland. There we go. And here there may even be a little rain, though most places will stay dry. Remaining sunny for most this afternoon, but cloud and a little rain pushing into the far west and far east. And that is how your weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.